What if a simple trip to McDonald's became the moment that changed a child's life forever? What if, amid the casual hum of customers ordering meals and children playing, a silent plea for help went unnoticed by everyone, except for one man? Keanu Reeves had only intended to grab a quick bite after a long day of charity work, but as he sat down with his meal, he noticed a young boy stealing hesitant glances his way. At first, it seemed like nothing more than curiosity, but when the child cautiously approached and whispered something chilling, Keanu realized he was the only person standing between the boy and a dangerous truth. Who was the sharply dressed man who claimed to be the child's father? Why did the boy's hands tremble as he clutched his broken toy car? And most importantly, what had he just confessed that made Keanu's pulse quicken with urgency? Join us in reflecting on this true story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification for more daily stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you are what. Ching from We would love to hear from you. It was a bright Sunday afternoon in Los Angeles, and Keanu Reeves found himself pulling into the parking lot of a McDonald's on a busy stretch of road. He had just come from a charity event supporting disadvantaged children, where he spent hours mingling, donating his time, and lending his voice to a cause he cared about. Though he was tired, Keanu felt a pleasant sense of fulfillment. Instead of returning home or seeking out an upscale restaurant, he decided to indulge in a simple meal at a fast food spot he rarely visited anymore. The air smelled of fries and burgers, and a wave of nostalgia washed over him as soon as he walked inside. The place was buzzing with life, families chatting at tables, children giggling around the small indoor playground, and the constant ping of the fryer mingling with the hum of the overhead lights. Keanu wore plain jeans, a casual black t-shirt, and a pair of sunglasses that offered modest anonymity. He placed a straightforward order at the counter, just a burger, fries, and a soda, before finding an empty table in a quiet corner. Sliding off his sunglasses, he glanced around, appreciating the unfiltered moment. As he settled in, he noticed a young boy at a nearby table who kept stealing glances in his direction. The child couldn't have been older than 5, with tousled blonde hair and a faded blue shirt. In his small hands, he clutched a broken toy car, gripping it like a precious artifact. Keanu offered the boy a polite smile, but the child's attention flickered to the man seated beside him. This man, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed out of place at a McDonald's, carried an air of strict authority. Every time the boy shifted or fidgeted, the man would cast a stern look, as if any minor misstep might set him off. Returning to his meal, Keanu tried to disregard the tension he sensed. Yet he couldn't fully ignore the uneasy dynamic unfolding at that other table. Something about the child's posture, shoulders hunched, head slightly lowered, hinted at fear. The man in the suit, who would later be identified as Harris, hardly paid attention to his own food. Instead, he thumbed his phone and occasionally snapped sharp words at the boy, whose name Keanu hadn't yet caught. Eventually, Keanu resumed eating, determined not to interfere unless absolutely necessary. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw the boy carefully slide off his chair. Clutching the broken toy car tightly, the child ventured toward Keanu with hesitant, measured steps. The bustling noise of the restaurant seemed to fade as the boy approached, each step reinforcing the gravity of his decision. When the boy finally stood beside Keanu's table, he hesitated for a few beats. Keanu turned, smiling gently to encourage him to speak. The child's eyes glinted with both trepidation and resolve, as though he had something urgent to communicate, but wasn't entirely sure how to do it. Leaning in, the boy whispered his name, Ethan, in a voice so faint that Keanu had to lean closer. Before Keanu could reply, Ethan's gaze darted over his shoulder and his small body tensed. Following that look, Keanu spotted Harris rising from his seat, smoothing the lapels of his jacket as he strode toward them. There was a coldness in Harris's eyes that made Keanu's instincts tingle with caution. Something fell off. With his hand still on the broken toy car, Ethan leaned closer to Keanu's ear and whispered words that made Keanu's heart skip a beat. Though the noise of the restaurant covered much of it, Keanu caught enough to sense the distress in the child's plea. Almost instantly, His pulse quickened. The boy seemed terrified, and whatever he had said was severe enough that Keanu's protective instincts roared to life. Harris arrived at their side, offering a tense, forced smile that didn't soften the hardness in his eyes. "Sorry about the interruption," he said in a smooth voice. "My son can be quite inquisitive. I hope he isn't bothering you." Ethan took a half-step behind Keanu, still clutching his damaged toy. Keanu, remaining composed, looked up at Harris. "It's no bother," he replied, his tone measured. "He just wanted to show me his car. Seems it's seen better days." Though Harris kept smiling, the line of his jaw tightened. He extended a hand, gesturing for Ethan to come closer. "We've got places to be," he said, his voice edged with impatience. But Ethan held his ground, trembling fingers wrapped around Keanu's sleeve. In that moment, Keanu felt a surge of responsibility for this frightened child who had whispered a worrying secret in his ear. The air buzzed with tension as Harris stood by Keanu's table, trying to coax Ethan away with a forced calm that failed to hide his growing agitation. Families around them continued their meals, mostly unaware of the silent standoff unfolding in that corner of the restaurant. A nearby waitress threw cautious glances in their direction, sensing that something wasn't quite right. Harris cleared his throat. "Listen, Ethan," he said with a practiced tone of authority. "Why don't you come back so we can finish eating? We don't want to overstay our welcome here." The words were polite enough, yet the undercurrent of threat did not escape Keanu's notice, or Ethan's. The boy shrank back, pressing closer to Keanu, who gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe Ethan just needs a minute," Keanu offered, keeping his voice level. "He seems nervous. I'm sure you can understand a kid's anxiety, right?" He looked Harris straight in the eyes, refusing to waver. Harris maintained his polite facade, but his forced grin slipped momentarily. "Kids can be complicated," he muttered, "but you're not exactly in a position to be giving parenting advice." At that point, the waitress stepped closer, balancing a tray of orders for another table. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her gaze flicking between Harris, Ethan, and Keanu. Keanu gave her a reassuring nod. "We're all right, thanks." "Actually," he said, glancing down at the boy, "could you bring Ethan a small drink? Something tells me he'd appreciate it." She nodded, lingering a moment before walking away, her concern obvious. Harris exhaled through his nose, irritation flashing in his eyes. "If you don't mind, we got places to be," he repeated, pressing the words harder this time. Keanu stood and turned slightly, positioning himself between Ethan and Harris. "I heard you," Keanu replied, managing to keep a calm air. "But Ethan seems uneasy. Maybe we should talk about what's bothering him." Ethan's grip on the broken toy car tightened. He leaned in toward Keanu, quietly whispering, "I can't say it here. He'll get mad." At those words, Keanu could feel a weight settle in his chest. Whatever was happening must be serious enough that this 5-year-old child felt compelled to confide in a complete stranger, yet remained terrified of the man who claimed to be his father. Meanwhile, Harris's phone buzzed, drawing his attention. He fished it out of his pocket, glanced at the screen, and answered with curt efficiency. Keanu used that brief moment to kneel beside Ethan, speaking softly so only he could hear. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm here, and I'll try to help." The fear in Ethan's eyes was unmistakable, but there was also a hint of relief, as though he knew he had found someone willing to listen. When Harris ended the call, he gestured impatiently. "Let's go, Ethan. Don't make me repeat myself." Keanu rose, crossing his arms in a stance that was both non-threatening and resolute. "He'll go with you once he feels safe," Keanu said, his voice calm but unwavering. Harris's eyebrows knitted together. "Excuse me," he challenged, tone grating. The waitress returned with a small cup of soda, setting it on the table. Sensing the mounting friction, she subtly angled her body to shield Ethan. "Here you go, sweetie," she said kindly, offering him a gentle smile. Ethan accepted it with trembling hands, his eyes flitting between Harris and Keanu. A few moments later, Harris, still fixated on the phone in his hand, took a step away from the table. His manner suggested he was considering his options. Looking at Keanu, he declared, "I'm stepping outside to take a call." Before leaving, he bent down toward Ethan, dropping his voice low enough that only the boy and Keanu could hear. "Behave," he hissed, his tone dripping with menace. "We'll discuss this later." As he stalked outside, the waitress exhaled, setting down her tray. "Is everything really okay?" she asked, eyes darting nervously. "Should I call someone?" Keanu paused, searching the restaurant for any sign of Harris returning. "Yes," he said quietly. "Call the police. I'm not sure what's happening, but I know it's not good." Ethan's face blanched at the mention of the police, but Keanu offered a comforting expression. "We just want to make sure you're safe," he explained. The child nodded, blinking back tears. After a moment's hesitation, the waitress hurried off to place the call, tried to appear inconspicuous while doing so. Moments later, Harris re-entered the restaurant, his phone call finished. He surveyed Keanu and Ethan with narrowed eyes. "Let's not prolong this," he said sharply. "We're leaving now." Keanu glanced down at Ethan, whose expression pleaded for help. "I don't think Ethan wants to go just yet," Keanu replied, carefully measuring each word. "But if you want to stay here and chat, we can do that. Otherwise, I suggest waiting until the police arrive." The mention of police caused Harris's jaw to clench. He forced a tight smile and slid his phone into his jacket pocket. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, stepping forward until he was uncomfortably close. Keanu stood firm, refusing to be intimidated, all too aware that time was ticking. The authorities would be there soon, but he needed to ensure Ethan remained protected until they arrived. Tension pulsed like a slow drumbeat through the busy McDonald's. Harris glared at Keanu, his gaze flicking between the actor and the small boy who clung to his sleeve. Everything about Harris's posture and tone screamed impatience. He seemed ready to walk out, or worse, drag Ethan out at any moment. Meanwhile, Ethan's knuckles had turned white from clutching the broken toy car. He kept his eyes on the floor, breathing unevenly. Suddenly, the front doors swung open. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside with measured urgency, scanning the tables. One was a tall man with a nameplate reading Ramirez, the other a shorter woman identified as Vega. A discreet wave from the waitress guided them straight to the tense tableau. Harris rolled his eyes, but an undercurrent of unease flashed across his features. "Is there a problem here?" Ramirez asked, voice firm but polite. Harris let out a short laugh, turning on a practiced charm. "Just a misunderstanding," he said smoothly, placing a hand over his chest. "My son and I were leaving, but Mr. Reeves here seems to think there's an issue." Keanu lifted his gaze to meet Ramirez's. "Ethan wants to stay. He's worried about his mother," Keanu said plainly. Officer Vega crouched down beside Ethan, offering a gentle smile. "Hey there, sweetheart. Can you tell us your name?" Ethan glanced uncertainly at Keanu, who nodded. "I'm Ethan," the boy whispered. Vega's gaze drifted to the broken car in his hands, then back to his anxious face. "Everything okay, Ethan?" she asked, her tone kind but concerned. Before Ethan could answer, Harris cut in, forcing another too-wide smile. "Officers, he's my son. He's just upset. Kids have wild imaginations. We really must be on our way." His voice wavered slightly, betraying a crack in his composure. Vega rose to her feet. "Sir, if your child is frightened, we need to understand why." Keanu lowered himself, so he was eye level with Ethan. "You can tell the officers what you told me," he encouraged softly. Ethan bit his lip. His eyes darted nervously to Harris, then back to Keanu. After a moment's pause, he inhaled unsteadily and mumbled, "He hurt my mom. She couldn't get up. I got scared." Silence descended like a heavy weight over the cluster of onlookers. A few nearby patrons halted their conversations to listen. Harris's calm facade cracked wide open, and he shot Ethan a venomous look. "That's ridiculous," he huffed, stepping forward. "He's confused. I'd never hurt anyone." Ramirez held out a firm hand to prevent Harris from advancing further. "We're going to ask you to step aside, sir," he ordered. Ethan, trembling, pressed closer to Keanu's side. "It's okay," Keanu murmured. "You did the right thing." Vega gently guided Ethan away, giving him a bit of space from Harris. Meanwhile, Ramirez focused on Harris, voice low but unwavering. "Sir, We have reason to believe there may be a domestic violence situation. We need you to remain calm and cooperate." Harris sneered, crossing his arms. "You have no evidence. I'm just trying to take my son home." His polished demeanor had all but evaporated, replaced by a simmering anger. At that moment, the waitress approached, quietly informing Ramirez that the manager had security footage of the interaction, if needed. Ramirez nodded, turning his attention back to Harris. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he said. "For now, you're not leaving." Officer Vega returned to Keanu and Ethan. "We've already requested medical assistance for the boy's mother," she explained, keeping her voice gentle. "Are you both willing to come with us to the house? We'll ensure everyone's safe." Keanu glanced at Ethan, who looked both terrified and relieved. The child nodded hesitantly. "Fine," Harris spat, as though capitulating to an unavoidable inconvenience. "But don't expect me to remain silent once my lawyer hears about this." Ramirez merely gestured for him to head toward the door under supervision. "We'll figure it all out," Ramirez replied. "Right now, we need to check on Ethan's mother." As Harris was escorted out, Keanu cradled Ethan's small shoulders, guiding him gently toward the police cruiser waiting outside. The sunlight felt harsh as they stepped onto the pavement, a stark contrast to the dim interior of the restaurant. Curious onlookers gave them a wide berth, whispering among themselves. Ethan's eyes flickered in every direction, confusion etched across his face. Vega opened the back door of one patrol car and ushered Ethan and Keanu inside, while Ramirez escorted Harris into another vehicle. The boy's trembling had diminished, replaced by a tentative calm. Keanu quietly reassured him that the most important thing now was to check on his mom. Ethan nodded, tears threatening to spill from the corners of his eyes. Within minutes, both police cars were on their way, weaving through Los Angeles traffic. Keanu watched as Ethan's grip loosened on the damaged toy car, as though the boy dared hope that relief might be near. Outside, the city glimmered with its usual hustle and glitz, utterly unaware of the life-altering events unfolding for one frightened child and the concerned stranger who had stepped in to help. They arrived at a small, unassuming house on a quiet street, a stark contrast to the bustle of the McDonald's they had left behind. Officer Vega and Keanu helped Ethan out of the squad car, while Ramirez pulled up behind them in the second vehicle, still tasked with monitoring Harris. The tension was palpable as they approached the front door, which sat slightly ajar. The silence surrounding the property felt unnaturally heavy. Ramirez called out, "LAPD, is anyone inside?" No response came. He and Vega exchanged a concerned glance. With firearms drawn, the officers moved cautiously through the doorway, alert to any sign of danger. Keanu stayed with Ethan on the front porch, carefully placing a hand on the boy's shoulder to keep him steady. Ethan clung to Keanu's sleeve, his eyes locked on the open door. After a few tense seconds, Vega's voice called from inside, "We've got someone here." Keanu glanced at Ethan, his heart pounding. He knelt down to the child's level. "It might be your mom," he said softly. "Stay close, all right?" Ethan nodded, face pale but determined. Stepping carefully into the living room, Keanu saw the scene. Scattered belongings, signs of a struggle, and the faint smell of something spilled or broken. Lying on the floor was a woman, presumably Ethan's mother, Sarah, unconscious but breathing. She had a gash on her forehead and bruises along her arms. Vega holstered her weapon and crouched beside her, checking for a pulse. "She's alive," Vega said, relief clear in her voice. "But we need an ambulance now." Ethan rushed forward as soon as he spotted his mother. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he tried to speak, but only a strangled sob emerged. Keanu gently pulled him back. "Let the officer help her," he murmured. Ramirez grabbed his radio, requesting immediate medical support. While they waited, Vega did a quick assessment of Sarah's injuries. "She's got a pulse, and she's breathing," she reassured them, "but she needs medical attention fast." In the doorway, Harris stood in custody, flanked by another officer who had arrived as backup. His face remained impassive, though his jaw tightened with frustration. "This is all a misunderstanding," he spat. as though repeating a well-rehearsed line. She must have fallen. His gaze flicked disdainfully over the disarray in the living room. Keanu's eyes narrowed at Harris's excuse. The wrecked furniture and scattered items suggested more than a simple fall. "Ethan told us you hurt her," Keanu said quietly, anger suppressed beneath a calm exterior. Harris tried to keep his composure, but a flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "That boy has too wild an imagination," he sneered. "You don't have a shred of proof." Just then, they heard the sound of sirens approaching. Paramedics rushed in, quickly transferring Sarah onto a stretcher. Ethan followed them with wide, fearful eyes. One paramedic paused to give him a comforting pat on the shoulder. "We'll take good care of your mom," she promised, her tone gentle. Officer Vega signaled for Ethan and Keanu to come outside, allowing the paramedics space to do their work. Standing on the lawn, Ethan clutched his broken car so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Keanu stayed right beside him, offering support with a steady hand on the boy's back. Ramirez stepped away to call in additional details to headquarters, while Vega read Harris's rights, listing the suspected charges: abuse, assault, and possible kidnapping intent, she said. Harris scoffed, but his bravado was fading. A second squad car arrived to transport Harris separately from the ambulance. As the officers guided him toward the vehicle, he threw one last glare in Keanu's direction. "You think you've done something good here?" he hissed. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Keanu met his stare without flinching. "All I know," he said steadily, "is that a mother is hurt and her child is scared. That's reason enough." Once Harris was out of sight, Keanu turned back to Ethan, who stood trembling on the curb. "Hey," he said softly, crouching so they were at eye level. "Your mom is in good hands now. We'll go to the hospital and make sure she's okay." Ethan nodded, tears still rolling down his cheeks. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. Finally, in a shaky whisper, he managed, "Thank you." Together, they watched the ambulance disappear down the street, sirens fading into the distance. The boy glanced up at Keanu, a silent question in his eyes. Would Keanu be there when all this chaos settled? Placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, Keanu offered a small nod. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The relief on Ethan's face was palpable as they climbed into the police cruiser that would take them to the hospital. Another stop on a day that had already changed both their lives forever. Dawn light filtered through the windows of the hospital room, illuminating the rows of monitors and force stands. Sarah lay in a bed, her forehead bandaged and bruises mottling her arms. Despite her fragile appearance, she was stable and on the path to recovery. Ethan sat by her bedside, gently holding her hand. In his lap rested the toy car, which Keanu had quietly arranged to have repaired, a small gesture to remind the boy that broken things could be fixed. Keanu stood off to the side, giving mother and son space. He wore the same clothes he'd had on at McDonald's, though they were more rumpled now, reflecting the emotional toll of the past few hours. Every so often, Sarah's eyes would flutter open, meeting Ethan's worried gaze. The doctors had assured them she'd be okay after some rest, physical therapy, and, most importantly, distance from Harris. Officer Vega arrived, greeting them gently. She explained that Harris was facing multiple charges, including domestic violence and endangering a minor. Additional notes discovered in Harris's backpack hinted at more sinister plans. He had been monitoring Sarah's movements and had even researched ways to leave the state with Ethan. This could have ended much worse, Vega said softly to Keanu. While Ethan remained at his mother's side, Keanu stepped out into the hallway with Vega. She offered a small smile. "You helped save 2 lives," she remarked. Keanu shook his head humbly. "Ethan saved his mom by speaking up," he replied. "I just happened to be there." Vega nodded. "Still, most people wouldn't have noticed a child's fear or would have brushed it off. You didn't." Keanu gave a modest shrug. "I'm just glad they're safe." Over the next few days, Sarah regained her strength. She and Ethan received guidance from social workers and legal advocates, ensuring they had a plan to press charges and find a safer environment. Keanu stayed involved, helping coordinate resources and offering quiet support whenever they needed it. Whenever Ethan grew anxious, he'd grip his newly repaired toy car and remind himself that heroes could come from unexpected places. A week later, an informal gathering was held at the local police station to honor Ethan's bravery. Officer Ramirez and Officer Vega organized a small ceremony in the briefing room. A handful of local officials and volunteers attended, including some from the domestic abuse shelter Keanu had recently partnered with. Ethan, dressed in a neat button-up shirt, stood shyly in front of everyone as Ramirez presented him with a small plaque that read, "Young Hero." Keanu stood at the back of the room, applauding as Ethan accepted the plaque. The boy scanned the crowd, spotted Keanu, and broke into a bright smile. After the official remarks, Ethan weaved through the small crowd and handed Keanu a drawing. The picture showed Ethan and Keanu holding hands in front of a house, with the words "My Hero" written in bold, colorful letters at the top. Keanu felt a lump in his throat. "That's you," Ethan said softly, pointing at the taller figure in the drawing. "Thank you, buddy," Keanu managed, voice thick with emotion. "But don't forget," he added gently, "you're the real hero here. You were brave enough to ask for help." Ethan blushed, but his grin widened. Sarah, standing nearby with her bandaged forehead and healing bruises, offered Keanu a tearful nod of gratitude. "I don't know how to express my thanks," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We'll never forget what you did." Keanu kneeled beside Ethan, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Just keep being strong for each other," he said. "And remember, help is always out there when you need it." Ethan nodded solemnly, hugging the repaired toy car to his chest. For him, it was more than just a plaything now. It symbolized hope and the promise of a better, safer future. In the days that followed, Keanu continued to drop by, ensuring Sarah and Ethan had everything they needed. He also used the experience as inspiration to advocate even louder for charitable initiatives, particularly those aimed at supporting victims of domestic violence. Though he was a celebrity known worldwide, it was moments like these, acts of quiet compassion and genuine connection, that resonated with him the most. Eventually, Sarah was cleared to return to everyday life, albeit with caution and ongoing support from the community. On the day she and Ethan moved into a safer environment, Keanu visited to say goodbye. Ethan clutched his hand briefly, eyes full of gratitude. "Promise you'll visit?" he asked. Keanu smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "I promise," he said. And with that assurance, they parted ways, both changed by a single, fateful encounter in a bustling fast food restaurant. In the span of one afternoon, an ordinary trip to McDonald's became the stage for extraordinary courage. A frightened boy named Ethan, clinging to his broken toy car, found hope in the quiet empathy of Keanu Reeves. While the threat of Harris loomed large, Keanu's decision to intervene demonstrated that vigilance and compassion can make the difference between tragedy and rescue. The swift response of Officers Ramirez and Vega ensured that Ethan and his mother, Sarah, received immediate aid and the chance to rebuild their lives. Beyond the chaos of that day, the incident underscored a crucial truth. True heroism often hides in plain sight. Whether it comes from a small child braving his fears or a concerned bystander willing to risk involvement, courage is seldom about grand gestures. It's about doing what must be done when someone is in peril. Keanu might be a famous figure, but his role in this story had less to do with celebrity and more to do with genuine human connection. Ultimately, the newly repaired toy car that Ethan carried symbolized more than a child's plaything. It represented hope. With Sarah's recovery and the legal system stepping in to hold Harris accountable, mother and son could begin healing. Their story became a beacon, reminding us that no matter how broken a situation seems, small acts of kindness and bravery can steer it toward healing. In the end, the power of compassion prevailed, leaving everyone forever changed by a simple moment in a fast food restaurant that turned into a life-altering rescue.